He was on television every week, smiling, laughing, lifting trophies, kissing the camera. The most recognizable face in English football. The captain, the golden boy, the man the public genuinely believed was loved by everyone around him. He was not. Behind the dressing room doors, away from the lights and the microphones and the parade floats, something else was happening entirely. Players who had won titles beside him, men who had bled on the same pitches and shared the same changing rooms for years. Some of them could not stand the sight of him. Some of them despised him, and a few of them made it very, very clear. This is the story of Emlyn Hughes. Not the version they put on television, the real one. Hughes arrived at Liverpool in 1967. Bill Shankley drove him up from Blackpool personally. And on the way, Shankley stopped a police officer in Preston and told him that the young man sitting in the passenger seat was going to be the future captain of England. That is the kind of entrance that changes a dressing room before you have even walked through the door. You're not just a new signing. You're the manager's project, his chosen one, and every player already in that room can feel it. Shankley called Hughes every Sunday morning, checked he was eating right, staying lean, staying focused. That personal channel between player and manager, that invisible line of communication that bypassed everyone else in the squad, was something the dressing room never forgot and never forgave. Hughes was loud. He was ambitious. He chased television cameras and took endorsements and made himself the face of the most successful club in England. While teammates trained, won, and quietly got on with their careers, Hughes was building a brand. His name was always the first one mentioned. His face was always the one the cameras found. And to men who had grafted in the shadows beside him and won those trophies with equal effort, that felt like something being taken from them. They did not just dislike him. Some of them despised him. Here are 5 of those men, and what they did about it. Number 5, Allan Clarke. By the mid-1970s, the Liverpool versus Leeds United rivalry was the most brutal fixture in English football. It was not competitive in the normal sense. It was physical to the point of violence. Both clubs understood that winning meant hurting, and both clubs had men who were very good at hurting. Allan Clarke, Sniffer, was Leeds' most dangerous and uncompromising striker. Clinical in front of goal, merciless everywhere else. When he played against Hughes, there was no mercy shown and no apology offered afterward. In one particularly vicious clash at Anfield, Clarke went into Hughes during a goalmouth scramble. The impact was savage. Hughes ended up flat on his back on the turf, blood coming from his nose, clearly in a bad way. Shaken, hurt, on the floor in front of his own supporters. Now, any captain would expect his teammates to react with fury. Any player on the floor would expect the men wearing the same shirt to say something, to square up, to make it known that you do not do that to one of ours. What happened next tells you everything you need to know about where Hughes actually stood in that dressing room. Tommy Smith, his own defensive partner, his own Liverpool teammate, the man who played beside him week in, week out, stood over the bleeding captain, looked across at Clarke, and said quietly, almost to himself, "Maybe that Clarke's not such a bad bloke after all." Read that again. An opposition player had just put the Liverpool captain on the floor, face covered in blood. And one of his own men thought it deserved a quiet smile. That is not a grudge. That is not a rivalry. That is something much deeper and much darker. Clarke was simply the man who gave Smith the excuse to say out loud what most of that dressing room was already thinking in private. Number 4, Stan Bowles. If there was one man in English football built in the exact opposite mold to Emlyn Hughes, it was Stan Bowles. QPR maverick, gambler, drinker, completely allergic to anything that smelled like performance. He did things his way, he said things on his own terms, and he had zero patience for players who played to the gallery instead of the game. The clash between Bowles and Hughes happened during an England squad meeting under Don Revie. Revie announced that appearance money for representing the national team was going up to £250 per match. A meaningful sum. Real money. The kind of money that mattered to players who had come up through nothing. Hughes immediately got to his feet. Voice high-pitched. Tone noble. He announced to the room that he had absolutely no interest in the money. He played for the glory of representing his country. The financial side meant nothing to him. To Hughes, this probably felt like the right thing to say. Noble, loyal, the kind of statement a captain makes. To Stan Bowles, it sounded like pure theater. Bowles cut in immediately. If Hughes did not want the 250 pounds, Bowles would take it for him. Hughes shook his head and called Bowles a fancy Dan. Bowles fired back without blinking, called Hughes a pipsqueak. The room knew who was being genuine. Bowles needed his earnings. He was not performing for anyone. Hughes, playing for the most successful club in England, had no financial reason to turn down 250 pounds in a squad meeting, unless he was doing it to impress someone sitting above him in that room. And that, to Bowles and to plenty of others, was exactly the problem with Emlyn Hughes. He was always performing, always building the image, always playing to the people with power over him instead of the players standing beside him. Number 3. Ron Harris. Ron Chopper Harris did not play for Liverpool. He played for Chelsea, and his specific reason for targeting Hughes had nothing to do with league position or club rivalry. It had everything to do with a man named Peter Osgood, and we will get to Osgood in full very shortly. What matters here is what Harris was. He was Chelsea's enforcer, the man the club sent in when a message needed to be delivered. And when Chelsea had a grievance, Harris settled it on the pitch. That was understood by everyone in English football at the time. You caused a problem, Harris came to find you. During a later match between Liverpool and Chelsea at Anfield, Harris targeted Hughes with a deliberate late tackle. Not accidental, not mistimed, deliberate. The kind of tackle that every professional in that era read immediately for what it was. A message. You are not forgotten. We remember what happened. Hughes went down, writhing on the turf. Again, his teammates came over. Again, and again, the reaction was not what you would expect from men defending their captain. Tommy Smith arrived at the scene. But instead of getting in Harris's face, instead of making it clear that nobody does that on this pitch, Smith reached down, grabbed the Chelsea Hardman by the shirt, looked him in the eye, and said with a smirk, "I could get to like you, Harris." Harris told that story for the rest of his life. Not because it was funny, though it was, but because it proved something important that people outside the dressing room did not know. The resentment toward Hughes was not just coming from rival clubs. It was alive and breathing inside his own changing room. An opponent had just floored his captain, and Smith's instinct was to shake the opponent's hand. Harris himself later said it plainly. Even Hughes's own teammates could not stand the constant noise, the whining voice, the way he always seemed to put himself at the front of every situation. That was the word from a man who tackled him. Imagine what was being said by the men who played beside him. This one is heavier than the rest. Peter Osgood was something the game does not always deserve. An elegant, instinctive Chelsea striker, gifted in a way that cannot be coached. He had pace, skill, and a presence in front of goal that made defenders nervous before he even touched the ball. He was going to be one of the greats. Everyone watching him in 1966 could see it. Then Emlyn Hughes happened. Hughes was playing for Blackpool at the time. The two clubs met in a League Cup tie, and in one moment, on one challenge, everything changed. Hughes went in from behind on Osgood. The result was devastating. A sickening bone break above the ankle. People in the stadium heard it happen. The sound itself told you how serious it was before anyone had even looked down at the ground. That is bad enough on its own. Injuries happen in football. Tackles go wrong. That is part of the game, and players understand it. What players do not accept, what the dressing room code makes absolutely unforgivable, is what Hughes did next. He got up. He did not look back. He did not check on the man lying behind him. He did not offer a hand. He did not offer a word. He did not even glance back with concern. He simply walked away, as if nothing of any significance had happened behind him. Osgood spent 8 months in recovery. He struggled psychologically during that time, put on weight, turned to drink, trying to cope with the uncertainty of whether his career would ever look the same. He eventually came back, helped Chelsea win the FA Cup in 1970, which tells you everything about how tough he was. He was strong enough to return and good enough to contribute. But those who watched him closely said he was never quite the same explosive player he had been before that night. The injury took something from him that he never fully got back. And at the root of all of it was that moment. Hughes standing up, turning, and leaving. Shortly before his death, Osgood was asked about Hughes. He did not need long to answer. He summed up the feeling in 3 words. Everybody hated Emlyn. Not just Osgood. Not just Chelsea. Everybody. That verdict, coming from a man with no reason left to exaggerate and no time left for pretending, carries real weight. This was not bitterness speaking. This was a man with nothing left to prove, saying exactly what he believed to be true. Let me be fair for a second, because the honest version of this story requires it. Hughes was not manufacturing success from nothing. He was genuinely talented. Shankley did not build his entire faith in him on personality alone. He could play. He could lead. He was brave. He was energetic. And on the pitch, he gave everything he had. Bob Paisley, one of the most sharp-eyed managers English football has ever produced, kept picking him, kept trusting him, and the trophies were real. Nobody handed him those medals. But here is the problem with that argument. English football in that era was built on a very specific social contract. You were good together or you were nothing. You did not make yourself the face of the group. You did not build a personal brand while your teammates stayed anonymous. You bought your round at the bar. You kept the dressing room inside the dressing room. You did not carry information back to the manager. You did not whisper campaigns in the boss's ear. Hughes broke almost every single one of those rules, and the men around him noticed every single time. Number 1, Tommy Smith. You cannot tell the story of Emlyn Hughes without Tommy Smith at the absolute center of it. Smith was not just another player with a grievance. He was the soul of Liverpool Football Club, a local man, a hard man, a player who had helped lay the very foundation that Hughes then walked onto and claimed as his own. The Anfield Iron. That is what they called him. A defender so ferocious that opponents planned their entire game around avoiding him. He had been at Liverpool before Hughes arrived, and he had done the dirty, unglamorous, essential work of turning the club into something worth inheriting. He was the enforcer, the leader in the trenches, the man the dressing room trusted completely. And from a certain point in the early 1970s, he developed a hatred for his defensive partner that never left him. The feud had 2 moments that broke everything beyond repair. The first happened on the 8th of May, 1972, before a vital match against Arsenal at Highbury. According to Smith's own autobiography, his own words, his own account, Hughes approached him and told him that several Arsenal players were willing to throw the match. £50 a man. Think about what that means. Either Hughes was passing on genuine information about match fixing, or he was testing Smith, or he was setting something up. Smith did not know which, and not knowing was itself the problem. The damage was done the moment the words left Hughes's mouth. Smith was disgusted. He did not go to Shankley. He said he could not bring himself to tell the manager because he believed it would have broken him. Shankley's entire identity was built on the purity of the game. So Smith told only Ian Callahan, his most trusted ally in the squad. And from that day forward, he stopped speaking to Hughes off the pitch. Entirely. Completely. The relationship was finished. The second fracture came in November 1973. Smith had been Liverpool's captain, a position he held with fierce pride. After a falling out with Shankley, the armband was taken from him, and the man who received it was Hughes. Smith believed, and said so publicly, loudly, and without apology, that Hughes had been in Shankley's ear, quietly working, suggesting to the manager that the captaincy should go to a younger man, positioning himself, building his case through whispers rather than performance. Smith called him a two-faced little so-and-so, and that was one of the more polite things he said. The dressing room split along clear lines. The older players stayed loyal to Smith. They mocked Hughes behind his back. They laughed at the way he always seemed to disappear when it was his turn to buy a round at the bar. Smith said that the only friends Hughes had ever made in football were, in his words, straight out of a vending machine. The physical hatred eventually spilled over during a match against Manchester City at Main Road. Smith simply punched him, mid-game, during play. He used the word lampied when he described it afterward. No epaligi, no regret. No explanation beyond the fact that something had been building for a long time, and it finally came out. And here's the thing that makes this story genuinely remarkable. Despite all of that, despite years of silence, contempt, match-fixing allegations, stolen captaincy, public insults, and one actual punch thrown during a First Division match, they still played together. They still performed. They still formed one of the most disciplined defensive partnerships in English football. When they crossed that white line, the feud stayed behind the dressing room door. Liverpool's culture demanded it. The club came first. Always. That was the rule. That was the code. And both men, despite everything between them, honored it. Bob Paisley acknowledged it openly. He said the two men absolutely detested each other, and that they played together with total mutual respect for each other's ability once the match began. Two truths, both completely real, both existing at the same time. Hughes even wrote in his own autobiography that Smith was the greatest captain he had ever played under, that despite never getting along with him personally, he had nothing but admiration for him on the pitch. Smith had no interest in returning the compliment. He remained uncompromising about Hughes until the day he died. No softening, no reconciliation, no late-career handshake for the cameras. Just the truth, as Smith saw it, held without apology until the end. Now step back and look at the full picture. Because those 5 feuds did not happen in isolation. They were not random clashes between difficult personalities. They were all connected by the same thread running through every single one. Hughes represented something new in English football, a new kind of player, one who understood that being good was not enough anymore, that you also had to be seen, that the cameras mattered, that the public image mattered, that the brand, before anyone was even using that word, mattered. He sought television appearances. He took commercial work. He made himself the most visible face of a team that contained dozens of players of equal or greater talent. And to the old guard, the men who had built that success through silence and shared sacrifice and collective graft, that felt like theft. Not theft of money, something worse. Theft of recognition, theft of credit, theft of a story that was supposed to belong to all of them equally. The money question kept coming up. Not the big contract money, the small everyday stuff. Pubs, bars, rounds bought after matches. The social ritual that working men used to show they were one of the group. Hughes, by multiple accounts, was slow to put his hand in his pocket. For men who saw generosity as a basic social code, that was a mark against him that never came off. And then there was the most serious charge of all. Teammates accused him of carrying information back to Shankley and Paisley, of telling the bosses what was being said inside the dressing room, which players were unhappy, which ones were causing friction, which ones were beginning to push back against management decisions. In football, that is about as serious an accusation as you can level at a man. The dressing room is a sanctuary. What is said there stays there. That is not a written rule. It does not need to be written down. Every player who has ever shared a changing room understands it instinctively. The moment that wall comes down, the moment one man starts feeding information in the other direction, trust collapses entirely. And trust, once gone from a dressing room, does not come back. Hughes was seen, by multiple players across multiple years, as someone who used the dressing room as a source of intelligence, who gathered information and used it to protect his own position and strengthen his relationship with the men in authority above him. Every time Shankley called him on a Sunday morning, every time he was the first one consulted, every time a teammate said something private and then watched it somehow reach the manager's office, the suspicion grew. The Shankley bond was both his greatest asset and his most damaging liability. Shankley had adored him from the moment he sat in that car and announced to a Preston police officer that his passenger was the future captain of England. That kind of faith from that kind of manager creates a loyalty that is almost impossible to break from above. But from below, from inside the squad, it creates something else. Distance, suspicion, a gap between the man inside the inner circle and everyone left standing outside it. Then there were the moments Hughes simply misread the room entirely. After Liverpool beat Everton in the FA Cup semi-final replay in 1977, Hughes took the microphone during the homecoming parade. He looked out at the crowd and sang, genuinely sang, that Liverpool were magic and Everton were tragic. He meant it as a celebration, a moment of joy. The crowd had gathered the trophy was real, and he was giving them what he thought they wanted. What he got was silence. Teammates behind him on the balcony flinched, looked away. The moment did not land, and it did real damage to what had been a genuinely respectful relationship between the two Merseyside clubs. The rivalry was fierce, but the communities were intertwined. Families were split between red and blue. You did not mock your neighbors like that in public. You just did not. Every Liverpool player standing on that balcony knew it instinctively. Hughes somehow did not. Then there was the political dimension. Liverpool was a working-class city with a socialist identity built into its bones. Shankley himself had been defined by collective values. The idea that football belonged to the working people, that the game was an expression of community rather than commerce. That was not a slogan at Liverpool. It was a genuine belief held by the men who built the club. Hughes publicly aligned himself with the Conservative Party. And on one occasion, in full view of cameras and journalists and the public, he kissed Margaret Thatcher on the cheek. For fans watching their city suffer real and visible economic pain during those years, the job losses, the deindustrialization, the deliberate neglect from Westminster, it looked like their captain choosing personal advancement over the people he was supposed to represent. It was not a small thing. It was a statement, whether he intended it as one or not. And statements like that, in a city like Liverpool, do not get forgotten. When the time finally came to honor Hughes on national television, everything that had been building for years became suddenly, painfully visible. The cameras were there. The applause was there. The tribute was genuine, at least from the outside. But some of the men he had shared a dressing room with for the best years of his career, men who had trained beside him, bled beside him, won beside him, chose not to show up. Not all of them, but some. And in football, in a world where the dressing room bond is supposed to be unbreakable, where teammates are supposed to be closer than family, the absence of those men said everything that none of them had ever said publicly.